Welcome to Rugby Uncovered. I'm Paul Rodriguez, and this week with Tom Nash, we speak to Red Roses head coach Simon Middleton. Welcome to the show, Simon.
Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that.
Now, Simon, it's fair to say that your love affair with rugby wasn't at first sight. Can you tell us a bit about that and how rugby won you over in the end?
Yeah, I think it was probably, I think like most sort of kids growing up, I was into football as much as anything. Rugby was something we sort of had to play at school, and I was a very thin, skinny, sort of ginger-haired kid who wasn't really good at rugby, didn't particularly like contact sports, and wasn't particularly good at it. So it wasn't exactly sort of love at first sight with it. I was the kid who got put on the wing because there was nobody else to go on the wing, and that's how it sort of went up until probably about 16, 17, and then I my older brother played at a local rugby union club, Nottingham Rugby Union Club, and I went down to watch him play, and I used to just enjoy being around. Just a great community club, and there's a real buzz about the place, and then I just got asked if I'd go and play in the Colts one time. I coached down there, and I went, and I thought, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And I had a couple of mates in the team, and it was just a totally different ball game altogether for me. I think the fact that we stopped on the way back from Middleton and a pub and went in and had a couple of pints when we probably shouldn't have done, so I helped things along, but it was allowed in them days. That was it. You were introduced to rugby, that's where it all started, and it was a major transformation from not really being engaged into it to being absolutely besotted by the sport.
So we can say to people, if it doesn't bite you straight away, if you don't get the bug straight away, this is something that you should just give it another try, because it may be your future without you realising it.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, 100%. I mean, at all levels, because, in terms of professional rugby, I didn't get into it till I was 24. So I was pretty late into the game, full stop, and I was very late into professional rugby. So, yeah, that's the beauty of the game. It gives you great opportunities, and never say never with it.
Tom and I are really enjoying the Premier 15's rugby, and the quality of the play was already at a very high standard, and in the space of 1 year it's gone up a notch.
Agree 100%. I think the standard of some of the play has been fantastic. It's as close to test match rugby as you're going to get, I would imagine, at the moment. Some of the games we've been to, and the gaps are closing between a lot of the sides, so you get a lot of competitive games. And I think that's testimony to the commitment obviously the commitment of the RFU to get the league, recognise the need for the league and to get the league up and running, but the commitment of the clubs as well. And, you see the engagement from the wider Premiership group of clubs now, with Exeter and Sale coming on board this year and, adding fantastic value to the league. And Allianz, taking up the sponsorship. So it's, within the clubs, the quality of coaching, S&C, medical, the whole infrastructure is just on the rise massively. And I think number one, people can see it as a genuine way to have a professional sporting career, be it in coaching or medical or S&C, and similarly with the players. And what you get is a product where you're getting real good athletes. You're getting really skillful athletes, knowledgeable rugby players, and the product's there to be seen. So it's fantastic.
Brilliant. Tom, over to you.
Simon, I think you didn't do yourself justice in answer to Paul's question, but your playing and then coaching career in both codes, league and union, read like a sort of boy's own story. What was it that got you interested in coaching women?
Oh, I'll be absolutely honest. I never even contemplated coaching. It was very much like the rugby story. I played, and I sort of envisaged finishing, and all the time I played, I had a full-time job. I worked for a company for 25 years and ran everything alongside it. So I just thought, well, I'll drop back into industry and whatnot. But I was playing at Leeds, and I got offered by Phil Davis when I finished playing. I got offered a chance to join the coaching team, sort of part-time, but just doing skills and things like that. And from that, I sort of got the bug. And you probably don't realise how addicted to the sport you are until you stop playing, and I think you read and you hear about how players drop out of the sport and environment and how much they miss the changing room. I think the thought of that, once I started coaching, wasn't lost on me, and I was like, if I didn't have this, I'm not quite sure where I get my buzz from. And so I took up the coaching reins, and my coaching development, my coaching career sort of developed through Leeds. I went from skills coach to defence coach, and then that broadened out to covering all aspects of play, really, with probably the exception of the set piece. And while I was doing it, I was doing badges like everybody does, the badges for football, rugby, whatever. And on my level 4 coaching course, I dropped on Gary Street. I was working with Gary Street on that. Yeah. And Gary's fantastic bloke. He's just one of the most funny blokes you've ever met. And we just became really, really good mates. And, at the time, Leeds were in the Premiership, and we were going pretty well. We were a little up and down, but we had a period of about 3 or 4 years where we were playing consistent Premiership. So, I suppose I fell into the elite sort of coaching category, and Gary was always looking at ways to try and expose the girls to different coaching levels and whatnot. And he just asked me if I'd come in and do some coaching with him in the build-up to the 2010 World Cup. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. One, because he was a mate, and two, by that point, I was like, I just wanted to coach. It's just a different coaching exposure. And I went in, and I remember the first coaching camp I did with girls, I was just absolutely blown away by just their commitment, the skill level, their enthusiasm. And that was it. And Gary was a little bit like, can I call on you again? And I'm like, 100%. And so, we became really good friends, and I came in and supported the girls and the England team through to the 2010 World Cup, just in a defensive capacity. So we're just doing defence and stuff like that. And obviously, it was a pretty successful campaign, just lost out in the final. And then, it sort of rolled on from there. And then I got an opportunity in 2014 to go on board full time. And I took it. And it was as head coach of the Sevens, but it was also with involvement in 2014 World Cup, which to actually be in the World Cup and be fully hands-on in the World Cup was it was irresistible, and that was it. We went it's history now, and things sort of built from there.
But things went really well in Rio. But at the end of that, you decided to focus just on the 15s. Was it too much, the 7s and the 15s together? Or
yeah, we sort of, it was strange. When I came in, the 7s and the 15s were very much, they were very much split. And there was one pool of players, they were shift players to and from, and it wasn't quite compatible. But it was obvious why the model was the model that everybody was following, because you wanted your best players shifting from one to another, and the adaptability of the players was such that it was the obvious thing to do. But my remit was always 7s with a real big focus on 15s, and then after the 2014 World Cup. I think that the coaching team had sort of come to the end of its life. Things recycle or go in cycles, and I got offered the opportunity to take up the head coach's role. But at that time, the idea was to umbrella the whole squad with one head coach. So really trying to synergize both programs, because there was a little bit of conflict between both programs, because you ended up, when you get two competitions running side by side, World Series and Six Nations, everybody wanted the best players, simple as. So we created one position, and I was fortunate enough to have that position. And what I would do is I would bounce between both programs, being head coach, depending on whatever the priority was seen as, but with a very good coaching structure underneath. So in 7s, I had Susie Appleby, and in 15s, I had Scott Beeman and Matt Ferguson at the time. So we had really good coaching support, coaching groups, and totally separate medical and S&C support. But we still had this the situation where the players were swapping from one to the other, and what I wanted to do was grow the pool of players, so we became standalone, because it became quite evident after Rio when we didn't medal, and after the World Cup in 2017 when we finished second, that we were a little bit, we weren't exactly jack of all trades because we were very competitive, but we weren't going to be masters of anything unless we cut our cloth accordingly, and and that's what we did, and we sort of split both programs and tried to grow both programs. But after Rio, I was always going to come back in and focus on 15s, and 15s was my game. And I absolutely loved coaching sevens. It was a totally different experience for me. I'd never coached it before I came on board with England, and I loved working in it. And I loved the people and the players I worked with there. But 15s was my game. So yeah, it became apparent that the job was just too big for one person to cover it all. So that's sort of how it evolved.
We have this conversation with players and coaches most weeks, actually, on Rugby Uncovered. Presumably it's going to go, I think it's going to go the way cricket is going, and you're going to have less crossover between the different formats in the future, I guess. Do you see it as inevitable that the shorter form of the game, that the shorter attention span, if you like, form of the game is going to become dominant in the long term, as in sevens, with its global status in the Olympics and tournaments like that?
No, I don't. To be honest, I think there's room for both, without a shadow of a doubt. But I think that the history of rugby union, the 15-a-side game, it goes so deep and is so strong and so loved across the world that I think there'll always be a huge passion and a huge audience for it. And at the end of the day, I mean, I don't know TV figures to the nth degree, and I don't know where the finance goes to the nth degree, but the 15s seems to be the game where there's masses of support and there's masses of interest in terms of media, sponsorship, etc. I think the sevens has still got a lot of growing to go. I think as a spectacle, the World Series is fantastic. The Olympics will probably only grow and grow, but I think there's a long way before the shorter form of the game overtakes the 15 side of it, if ever. But I do believe there's unquestionably place for both, because they're very different sports. And whereas they do appeal to a generic audience, I think they've also got their niche audiences. I mean, the sevens is a real sort of party atmosphere and a party environment in terms of the fans, and certainly not the players. It's anything but that. It's an absolute grueling competition. People will never appreciate it until they've played just how tough those World Series and that World Series program is. But then you get the 15s, which are a huge festival of rugby, and I think there's definitely room for both.
Sure, interesting. We've seen the elite women's game in England develop really impressively since the launch of the Premier 15s 3.5 seasons ago. And I would argue that the start of 2021 is almost another new beginning for the game, the women's and the men's, the world over. If it's going to continue to attract new players who are currently 10 years old, things have got to change, in my opinion. I know it's not an easy question, but I think the game has got to move on now, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think like any sport, I think that there has to be a check and challenge against everything you do to see, if your sport is up to date, is it appealing to an ever-changing audience? And I think there's I mean, the thing with rugby union in particular, the real changing landscape of rugby union at the moment is that there's a couple. Number one is the physicality of the game. So in terms of how the game's played, it's a really tough sport played by great athletes. Now with that comes the danger of some of the games you see which become very defense dominated, and defense. is generally for the purist, that type of game. Fans want to see points scored and they want to see attacking rugby. So you get this, you get I think it's gone through a period where it's become very strategic and very physical dominated. So there's, in terms of how we open the game up, creating avenues for it to be probably more high intensity in terms of ball movement and more fluidity in play. I think you've always got to look at the laws of the game and probably the parameters of the game to see how you can do it. And they do, I mean, the referees, obviously, they fall under the RFU banner. So we see the amount of scrutiny that's placed on the game and what they go through and how they, and how World Rugby adapt laws to try and speed up the game or to try and make the game safer, which is the key bit really at this point in time, simply because of the physicality bit. So I think, there's always tweaks. There's always tweaks to try and keep the game moving forward. And I think it is recognised if an area of the game looks like it's becoming a little too dominant or a little bit too stale, they'll try and put things in place to try and change it. Wholesale changes needed? I don't think so at this point in time. But then again, I'm a bit of a traditionalist and a tactician, so I love certain areas of the game. But having said that, I've seen a couple of Premiership games over the weekend where it looks like kicking was banned, and the movement of the ball and the energy, intensity, and the amount of points scored was phenomenal. I think the game has to keep evolving all the time, and the real acid test is that we listen and we observe the spectators and hear their voice and what they want, because ultimately we're in the entertainment business. And if it's not entertaining, then they're not going to come. And, we rely massively on them.
But you were unusual. You were the skinny kid on the wing, but you were obviously quick. You really were likely to go to football, weren't you? But you decided on rugby. How do I, as a rugby man, attract that skinny kid on the wing to come and play rugby rather than to defect to football?
Yeah, well, I think... Well, you probably don't need to have as much skill. you can get by with pace, for instance. Which was the thing I had. I think this is the area where a game like Sevens and the shorter version of the game do come into play. Because I did spend a couple of years working at a college director of rugby at a college, and you can see the challenges of getting young players into the game and keeping young players in the game. So getting the 14 to 18s in, then keeping the 18 to 25s in. And that's where Sevens and the shorter form of the game has a massive role to play as well in terms of grassroots rugby and really engaging players into it. I think, I think the thing that is never lost on me in terms of rugby, and one of the things I think is overlooked too much, is the engagement that grassroots rugby has for players playing. So the club environment, the friendships, the bonds that you form, and I think it's really critical that those areas are supported, because they go hand in hand with the on-field stuff, goes hand in hand with the off-field stuff, I find, and it's just making sure that clubs are supported and players can be engaged into it and supported in an appropriate way, be it through coaching or be it through festival rugby or whatever. It's tough. It's a really competitive world, isn't it, at the moment? It's competitive in terms of sport. I'd argue that probably the biggest competition to rugby is probably gaming, because it's so easy for kids to sit and play. But I've got a son who's he's got a network of friends and they're always on their Xboxes together and things like that. But he plays football rather than rugby. I had a daughter who played rugby, but he loves to get out with his mates and play football and play sport. And if it's football training or it's football in games or it's basketball, and he loves playing basketball and things like that. I think the key bit is to get them out of the house and get them onto the field or onto the court, because that's when the engagement starts and that's when the sort of love affair with sport really starts. So it's getting them out there and creating opportunities for them to be involved in sport in whatever guise.
You'll probably be able to relate to this, but our pause in my conversation with the Netherlands team was that some of those players were still playing top level basketball and wrestling and tennis at the age of 15, 16 before they were persuaded to play top level rugby. So they had that overall gymnastic athletic ability as well as coordination, because they're playing other sports at the top level until the last minute. It's an interesting point.
Yeah, and I think it's it's usually important that young people do get the chance to play a portfolio of sports and engage into it, rather than just my lads played a number of different sports. I'm getting into squad, we play squash together now and things. I think it's particularly this point in time exercise is hugely important, but it's that bit where you can experiment with lots of sports and you may not find the one that really suits you until later life, and which was a little bit like me. I played football, cricket, tennis, I'd go at pretty much everything, and then sort of came back to rugby in the end.
If there were time in a typical professional career, that would be the ideal, wouldn't it? To find out and to experience all those different disciplines before deciding on the. We always say we all went to university too early. We were far too young to go to university, and 25, 30 is a much better age. So yeah, interesting. Simon, stay sane. Best of luck. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure. And good luck. I'm assuming that the Six Nations is now in April, but all the best for that. Yeah, well, we'll be ready whenever they come round. Hopefully, if not February, March, April, May. So, cheers, guys. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Simon. All the very best. Thank you. Take care. Bye. And thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.